update. So we'll spend some time here today going over some of the significant forest health events that are relevant to the municipalities that happened here in 2022, and provide some minimal outlook looking forward into 2023. So a brief agenda for today. I'm going to start off, and good morning. Yeah, I'm Mike Parisi. I'm one of the forest entomologists here at the Maine Forest Service. I'll be just talking about emerald ash borer to get us started. After that, we'll move to Tom Schmelk. So Tom's also an entomologist here at the Maine Forest Service. Tom's going to provide us with some information on brown-tail moth, and then some winter moth. And then finally, we'll go to Colleen Tierling, another entomologist here on the team at the Maine Forest Service. So Colleen will provide us with an update on hemlock woolly adelgid, red pine scale, and beech leaf disease. So again, this meeting is for you. So please, we ask that you bring questions. Feel free to enter them in the chat. We can try to take them as is as we go, or we can also kind of do them at the end of a certain topic. So some of you are probably tuned in for pesticide or forester continuing education credits. So this is eligible for 1.5 of those forester continuing education credits and one licensed pesticide applicator recertification credit. So you did have an opportunity to indicate you were looking for those credits on the registration form. If not, you can also still complete that. Amy will be putting up in the chat box the link to that registration, and there will be a short questionnaire or quiz rather based on the content of this meeting. So after you've seen the presentations, you can go ahead and complete that. A passing score of 80 is required to get your credit. So a couple of things. I know we might have some call-in guests. So if you're on the phone and you need those pesticide or forester credits, after the meeting is done, you can contact Amy Emery, 287-2431. or foresthealth@maine.gov, and Amy will also put her contact information in the chat box at some point so you can get a hold of her. And then the other situation we're aware of is that there might be groups of people watching on one computer. So if there's multiple people in a group and you all need a credit for pesticide or forester credits, after this is done, the link Amy will put in the chat will remain valid for a short while after the meeting's over. So we ask that everybody please go in and complete on their own individually. So yeah, with that, I think that satisfies most of the housekeeping. So we'll go ahead and get into the presentations. Okay, so 2022 was a somewhat eventful year for emerald ash borer here in Maine. We do have quite a few new detections, so to speak. As most of you are aware, we do have two core areas in Maine that are affected by emerald ash borer presently. So I'll start up north. So most of this infestation zone is confined pretty much to the border and the river valley there. So we haven't had too many new detections up there. We did have one in Fort Kent this year. So that was through the use of a girdled trap tree. So I'll have a slide on that later on the girdled trap tree program. But yeah, from what we've seen so far, obviously EAB has been in northern Maine for years now. It's been progressing, relatively slow, certainly in comparison to southern Maine, where we've seen some really rapid progression. So on that note, yeah, moving on to southern Maine. So within the regulated area, we're seeing a lot of local spread, natural spread within those areas. So you can kind of see the trajectory on a year-by-year basis in this map on the right. So yeah, 2021 was significant. Now we added southern Oxford County to the map. And then, yeah, I'll get onto these as well. So we had two pretty significant detections in 2022. Given their locations, they're both in non-regulated areas. So I'll talk about some of the regulatory boundaries. But the first one of note is in Lewiston. So that represented the first county detection for Androscoggin County. And yeah, that was basically, a roadside tree exhibiting woodpecker damage that we observed and then followed up on and found a pretty decent or not significant or extensive infestation, but one that's likely been there for a number of years. As we've seen, when we find these, they usually have been there for several years. And then the next being a tree in Oakland on the side of I-95, so right in the Oakland-Waterville area. And again, that represented the first county detection for Kennebec County. So Those are the big new updates, and I'll just mention in the southern Maine regulated area, some of these towns are new. So I believe Casco and Naples and Gray were new in 2022, as well as Dayton. Basically, just kind of filling in some of the blank areas on that map for the southern regulated zone. But then other towns like Freiburg, Limerick, and Yarmouth have had detections in the past. We've just wound up detecting EAB in new areas in those towns through other methods. So again, that kind of indicates that local spread that I was referring to there. So as many of you are aware, emerald ash borer still is a regulated pest here in the state of Maine. So something we spend quite a lot of time on in terms of regulatory enforcement and laying out these boundaries. So I like to always show these maps side by side so we can see where we came from and where we are now. So on the left there, you can see the previous boundaries of the regulated zone as of last year. And then this map on the right, and I apologize, it's not super visible in the PowerPoint here, but all these maps are available online. We have a pretty extensive emerald ash borer regulatory and just general info webpage. So Amy can probably pop that into the chat as well. If anybody hasn't seen that, that's a wealth of resources, especially if we have any new folks tuning in. But yeah, basically the major changes were the addition of 2 emergency water areas in response to that Lewiston, Auburn, and then the Oakland Waterville find. So you can see how that blue hatched area has expanded to encompass those new detections. And yeah, we're still doing some survey work. We did quite a bit of survey work in between. So as you can see, the Oakland Waterville emergency water area is obviously separated from the main body of the regulated area, but we haven't found EAB in between. So for that reason, we have chosen not to connect those areas. So the Oakland Waterville detection kind of remains as an island, so to speak, until we have some more information. So we'll see what we uncover during our survey in the winter months. But basically, yeah, these boundaries change all the time, especially if you're a municipality on the edge. Pay attention to these. We probably will be seeing some changes by next year, so keep an eye out for those. But yeah, like I said, these maps are always available in their current form, so keep an eye out. They do change. And a question we get a lot is what's the purpose of all this regulatory work? What are we trying to protect here in Maine? So here you can see those detection points, so those red dots, with a buffer area indicating, a likely infested or a possibly infested area. So as you can see, the vast majority of Maine is still EAB, as well as that green hashed area. So that green area in the center of the map is the basal area for ash. So as you can see, even though ash is only 2% of all the ash trees in Maine, it's certainly concentrated in that belt there in central Maine. And so, the Oakland Waterville detection there is particularly devastating because we were doing quite a good job of keeping, things restricted to southern Maine. And obviously we can't prevent natural spread, in short distances over a year, but that obviously represents a likely human-aided spread to a site up there. So despite all these statistics, yeah, still only 16% of Maine's ash trees fall in regulated areas. So, well over 80% are still healthy and EAB free. So that's a huge resource, and especially important to protect with all the other forest health issues we have going on in Maine that you're probably familiar with. So I'll just give an update on some of our monitoring activities. So obviously we're always on the lookout for EAB. So one of our core programs is still the Purple Prism Trap monitoring program. So we use these in non-regulated areas. And you can see on that map how kind of, we don't really trap, up near Edmundston on the Canadian border there, because we know that area is infested, and the same for southern Maine. Most of York and Cumberland County, have no traps, but we put up about 200 traps each and every year. So we check them twice a year, once in the middle of the season and once at the end when we take them down. So yeah, quite an extensive survey. Again, an early detection tool in non-regulated areas. So we did recover 6 beetles in the genus Agrialis, which is the same genus as EAB, but those are all native beetles. So no EAB were detected through this survey in 2022 here. So we're glad to see that. Another program we've been working on in cooperation with the Urban Forestry Group, Project Canopy, is this green funnel trap survey. So Unlike the purple prism trap survey, this survey is actually geared towards the regulated areas. So, this is basically a tool for monitoring that local spread and how we've gotten a number of these new detections, in the same town that we know has a population of EAB, but in a new area. So, those examples right there, Freiburg, Yarmouth, we've had multiple detections in those towns, and, some of them have come through these green funnel trap samples. So yeah, big highlight there, and we've had some other detections. So the Casco and Naples area of the map is now filled in. We did have this detection of EAB and a green funnel trap in Casco, so we're kind of filling in the gaps on the north side of Sebago there. So, but yeah, no major new finds. Obviously, we found some new populations in known infested towns through this program, but nothing super alarming, fortunately. Another program we participate in is biosurveillance. So if folks aren't familiar with this is a pretty neat program. So there's a native predatory wasp that actually hunts metallic wood-boring beetles like emerald ash borer. So this has been found in other places to be pretty effective if you're in an EAB populated area. But anyways, these are ground nesting wasps, and we can monitor their colonies to see what kind of prey they're bringing back. So we do that actively each and every year where available. Sometimes these colonies, disappear or whatever, but we find the most reliable ones and give them multiple visits to monitor the prey items and stuff like that. So as you can see, it's pretty lucrative compared to the purple prism trap survey, where 200 traps returned, 6 metallic wood-boring beetles. When you use these specialized insects to do the work for you, we were able to screen 233 beetles. Unfortunately, again, none of these are EAB in 2022, but we have found EAB at one of these colonies in a known infested area in the past. And like I said, they've done this in other states for detections as well. So pretty neat program. Another trap program, and maybe some people on the line have participated in this. This is the girdle trap tree program. So as you can see, here's what the distribution looked like around the state in that map on the right in 2022. So again, we kind of use this for both purposes, and it's kind of based on cooperators, but we certainly utilize it, in regulated areas to monitor that natural spread, as well as non-regulated areas. So most of the effort is towards those non-regulated areas, but this is a very effective tool. We've had a lot of success, quote unquote, with detecting EAB through this method. So as you can see, and I mentioned on that first slide, Fort Kent this year was found through a girdle trap tree detection, and then again in southern Maine, 2 trees in Portland and 1 in Yarmouth. So yeah, basically, if people don't know, it involves artificially injuring a tree through girdling in the spring, which puts the tree into a state of stress that emits certain volatiles and stuff that emerald ash borer can pick up on, and makes it a more suitable host. And then in the fall, we go back and destructively sample these trees by peeling to look for EAB larvae. So yeah, if people are interested in this, again, check out our website, or you can check in with Amy at forestsouth.gov. We're looking at Maine.gov. We're looking for cooperators each and every year. We have some repeat customers, but we're always looking to try this in new areas. So if you're interested in it, please reach out, and we'd love to get volunteers lined up for next year. Biological control is one of our big management activities for emerald ash borer here in Maine. So ever since we were able and we started receiving parasitoids, we've been releasing them in southern and northern Maine. So basically, we continue to do so actively in southern Maine because of all of the new infestation sites. We constantly have new areas we can look at to release them. In northern Maine, we've done repeated releases at certain sites, and we don't have a lot of new sites because EAB really hasn't spread. So the pattern is to release for a certain number of years and then go back and monitor for a few years to see whether you have population establishment. So that's really the phase we're at in northern Maine right now, but we're not quite at in southern Maine, although we do some recovery work in southern Maine as well, but we again are actively releasing. So you can see the totals there, over 10,000 Chasticus, 7,000 Spacius, and 13, almost 14,000 Ovius. So yeah, pretty big numbers. In the grand scheme of things, we'd always love to be releasing more, but that's what is available to us. So that's what we're releasing. And yeah, as I mentioned, that recovery work has shown in at least in northern Maine, hopefully we've recovered Tetrasticus planopenisi for the first time in 2021. So that's a good start. Obviously we'll continue to monitor and make sure that population, that natural population persists. So hopefully we'll get some more recoveries in 2022. I think we're still looking at those samples. So, but 2 years of recoveries in a row would indicate we have good establishment there. And then obviously these are natural, parasitoids, and they can perpetuate their own population. So, yeah, and like I said, the other one thing about this, these are notoriously difficult to recover. So we haven't recovered the other two yet, but we continue to work on that, and I believe eventually we will. So that's basically the short summary of all the EAB work we're doing, in the state. And then, as we go into winter here, I just want to point out to folks on the line, most of our, detections that get reported are through woodpecker activity. So, it's been a reliable, but unfortunately, a little late in the game detection tool. It means EAB is well established in an area by the time trees start to look like this, but we still do really want to know about this and need to know about this. So if you see anything like this, please call it into us so we can follow up on it and see whether we have EAB in a certain area, or there's a lot of false alarms that look like this. But this is the overall patterning. That photo on the right there, we call it blonding, but the woodpeckers will remove small bark flakes and reveal that light colored inner bark. And this is what it looks like in close up on the left here. As you can see, a couple examples where that bark flake is missing. And then those holes associated with it mean that an EAB larva has been extracted from that hole. So that's really what we look for. And then trees like this, we go and we peel to see what's going on beneath the bark, so we can see. I bring it up because we're supposedly headed to winter here. It doesn't really feel like it or look like it, but this is really useful. When you have fresh snow on the ground and you see anything like this piled up underneath an ash tree, it's kind of a dead giveaway. So yeah, please always report this stuff to the Maine Forest Service if you see anything like this, pretty much regardless of location. Like I said, we're mapping new spots, but we're also monitoring that local spread in areas where we know EAB exists extensively. So for our records, this is really valuable. So that's all I have on EAB. So we can, I don't know if any questions came into the chat or not specific to EAB. Does not look like it. So yeah, if anybody thinks of any EAB questions, please get them in the chat. We can address them at the end of the talk, or you can open up your mic at the end. We'll have a question and answer session, but for the time being, then I will stop sharing and we will go to Mr. Tom Schmelk to talk about brown tail moth and winter moth. Yep, now we got you full screen, Tom. Thanks.
Perfect. So like Mike mentioned, I'm one of the other entomologists with the Maine Forest Service, and primarily I'm the program lead for the brown tail moth program, but also the winter moth program. So I'll just be giving an update on those two species. So we'll start off with everybody's favorite human health nuisance. And for once, I actually have some good news, which has not been the case for the past few years. So this year, just to refresh everybody's mind, so we do 2 rounds of aerial survey each year. One in the late spring, early summer to pick up the actual defoliation from the large mature caterpillars. And then there's another round of aerial survey in late summer, early fall to pick up that skeletonization damage from the young brown-tailed caterpillars that just hatched out in August. So total area of acres defoliated or acres of damage that we surveyed from the air in 2022, this year, is almost 152,000 acres. And that's actually down quite a bit from 2021, which we had about 200,000 acres of defoliation. So really great news, huge drop, but unfortunately we're not out of the woods yet. It's going to take another couple of years of cool, wet weather in May and June. One of the reasons why browntail has built up to these numbers is because we've had non-typical springs. It's been really hot and dry. particularly in that May and June time window, which has really hurt the pathogens that really knock browntail down and keep the population under control. So the two primary pathogens for browntail in Maine are there's a NPV virus that attacks browntail, and then also a fungus called Entomophaga allici. So even though it was still sort of dry this spring, we did have some rain events in May and June, and the population was just at such a high threshold that it was sort of ripe for a population decline, even though it wasn't a typical really wet spring. So so we had some increases and some decreases. Probably the largest decrease was actually in Kennebec County here. You can see it's down almost 92,000 acres, quite a big drop. But unfortunately, we also have some areas of really high increase. So Penobscot County probably saw the biggest increase, which is up almost 27,000 acres. And then we have sort of a tie for second and third place with Androscoggin having 8,500 and Waldo County with 8,600. But grand scheme of things, we are down about almost 47,000 acres from last year. So what does this all look like on the ground or in sort of a way that you can more interpret this data? So over here in Kennebec County, Augusta area, remember that was a pretty large decrease, almost 92,000 acres of decrease. So what happened, and you can see that these areas here, so Androscoggin, around the Turner Leeds area, up in Penobscot County, and then Waldo County, it's sort of it almost looks a little bit like a donut effect. So you can see this capital region used to be sort of the hotbed for the last couple of years, and as you can see, the center sort of collapsed, and then you have these outer lying really high population areas. And again, I'm very hopeful for next year that we have actually some wet spring weather to further these decreases. But if we do not get that weather, these populations on the outskirts will likely, refill that hole that was left from this past year. Okay, so some really important news. The Browntail Bill LD 1929 was passed, and now we are in the process of getting together the Browntail Moth Mitigation Assistant Grants. So right now we're in the rulemaking process for that, and what those rules will do is it's going to set up the process for government entities or nonprofits, that process for application, and then it's also going to sort of detail how those funds will be distributed. And speaking of funds, so this browntail mitigation assistance is about $150,000, and that's sort of a one-time pool of money, and that's for the whole state. And this is for government entities and nonprofits to apply to have some assistance with their mitigation efforts. So along with the Browntail Bill LD 1929, we were able to, as part of that funding, we were able to hire 2 limited term positions, and these will be 1.5-year positions that will sort of help us out with this grant allocation, but also with some of our other programs. So we recently hired an entomologist 1, Brittany, and she will be based out of Old Town. And then there's also a senior entomology technician, and Alicia, who's one of our FIA crews, and she will be also out of Old Town. So it's nice to get some help here. So if you want the latest and greatest with the progress of the rulemaking and for this brown-tailed moth mitigation assistance, definitely sign up for a brown-tailed moth bulletin. We'll put a link in the chat to be able to sign up for that. So not only will you get updates for these assistance grants, but you'll also get updates on development during the growing season for browntail. And we usually keep this pretty updated. Okay. So next, the second half is winter moth. So this is just a little bit of background of winter moth for those of you who are not familiar with it. Luckily, it does not cause a rash, so it's not as well known of a pest, but it is very prevalent in coastal Maine. So it's a non-native moth originally brought over from Europe. It was brought over in soil associated with nursery stock, and that's still how it spreads, is mostly through human-assisted dispersal. So this is what the adult males look like, fully winged, fully capable of flight, and this is what the females look like. And the females have very reduced wings, and that's sort of an adaptation to save energy and put it more towards egg production. So interesting part of the biology of winter moth is that the females obviously are not capable of flight, and when they emerge from their pupa in the soil, they need to climb up the trunk of the host in order to be able to lay eggs on the bud tips or the branch tips. So that is sort of one aspect of biology that we can sort of jump on and use to control winter moth, and that's why you see a lot of people, especially in coastal Maine, putting sticky bands around their trees in November and December in order to be able to capture a lot of these females. So the females will emit this pheromone that will call these winged males to them. Again, an energy-saving tactic. These are what the caterpillars look like. Definitely not to scale, but they're small green inchworms, and they have these longitudinal yellow stripes that run down the length of their body. And they're typically active from mid or late April through May until June, when they pupate and drop into the soil. So one of the things about winter moth is that we do actually have a successful biocontrol agent, which is something that I wish we could say about all of our forest invasives, but it's sort of a perfect situation. There's a parasitoid fly called Cyzenus albicans that's very specific to winter moth, only attacks winter moth, and gives really, really great control. And they've been releasing it in Massachusetts and southern New England, and they've had really great success, almost too good, in fact, because you can't really find large populations of winter moth. And I'll sort of cover that in a couple of slides of why that's a good thing, but also a bad thing for Maine. Here in Maine, we've been releasing these parasitoid flies since 2013, and we started recovering flies from our previous release sites in 2016, all the way up through this current year. Again, not a really picky eater. Favorite hosts, and what we see it most in is maples, particularly Norway maple, which they really like, but also oaks, fruit trees, everything all the way down to blueberries. This is sort of the damage that they are creating in that May time slot. And it's sort of it looks like somebody took a shotgun to the leaves, and it's sort of this shot hole pattern. And also it's pretty evident in some areas. This is in South Bristol when you go in the fall, and you can see all the damage. And in very high infestations, these leaves will sort of be reduced to strips and can be completely defoliated. So sort of as a caution, so I mentioned that winter moth moves in soil material, and that's how it came to the U.S. And to Canada. So the pupa are in the soil from June through November, so just about half the year. So basically, they will hatch out of their eggs in mid-April to late April and begin feeding on host foliage, so the expanding buds and the new leaves. And then they will sort of continue feeding throughout May, and then at the end of May or early June, they will drop off the hosts and sort of crawl away from the host plant a little bit, and then bury down into the soil, and they'll create this pupa. So it's about the size of a Tic Tac, a little small dirt clod, and they're very, very difficult to pick out. So a lot of people will dig up hostas or iris unknowingly from an infested area and bring it up to camp or to a house or give it to their friends, and they're unwittingly moving winter moth with them. So we ask that people do not move plants with associated soil material from June through November. So if you want to have a Mother's Day plant sale, that's okay because they're in caterpillar form at that point. But if you are going to move any plant material from this time period, June through November, you're going to want to make sure that you're washing all the soil off the roots. Okay, so I mentioned before that winter moth biocontrol program has been extremely successful in southern New England, and why that's bad news for Maine is because we used to get collections supplemented from Massachusetts. So to rewind a little bit, here in Maine, we go back to our previous release sites, and this is typically happening in late May, and we will beat the trees that have winter moth damage and collect many thousands of caterpillars. And a certain percentage of those caterpillars will have these parasitoid flies in them. So we collect them, we rear them until they pupate, and then we send them to UMass Amherst, our collaborator Joe Elkington, and he sends us back the fly pupa. And in the early days, when winter moth was very prevalent in southern New England, he would send us a bunch of winter moth pupa and caterpillars that were collected in Massachusetts or the surrounding area. And unfortunately, this fly has been so successful at its job, they don't have really large numbers of winter moths down there to collect. So we're sort of relying just on what we have here in Maine. So this year we had a lot of reports of defoliation come in, Phippsburg, Kittery, Casco Bay, South Portland, West Bath, Harpswell, South Bristol, and Mountain Desert. And some of these areas, particularly Kittery, Harpswell, and South Bristol, are previous release sites, Kittery being the oldest and the first release site here in Maine. And it was a little alarming because we've had really good success and really good establishment of this fly, but that's sort of just the way that winter moth works. It will escape its predators and sort of go into outbreak and cause problems. So this year, with our caterpillar collections, we collected almost 7,000 caterpillars this past May, but that only yielded about 500 of these parasitoid flies for future release in Maine. Just to give you an idea of what the numbers used to be like in the early days, we used to be releasing 2,000 or 1,500 flies at each release site. So just relying on what we have here in Maine, it's been a little tough to get enough flies to really establish them in other areas. Okay, so I mentioned when we collect the caterpillars, we do send them down to our collaborators at UMass Amherst, and they are able to determine the rate of parasitism at each of these release sites. So each of these collection sites, with the exception of Brave Boat Harbor, are previous release sites that we've put emergence cage on the ground and released these flies. So since we were getting a lot of reports of defoliation from Kittery, and we've gotten these reports for 2 or 3 years now, we just wanted to see what was going on. And there was this Brave Boat Harbor Road, which has some land trust land that's open to the public that had been experiencing a lot of this defoliation. We just wanted to see basically how far this fly has spread, and if it was even over there. And Brave Boat Harbor Road is about 3 miles from Kittery, and that was our first release site, but we've also done multiple releases in Kittery. And we found that 3 miles from that release site, where we've never released flies before, we had a rate of 12% parasitism, which is great news. When you get into the higher teens, that's when you see sort of a really marked decrease in the damage that you're seeing from winter moth. So actually at Fort McClary, our release site, we had 21% parasitism, which is phenomenal. But other sites like Cape Elizabeth, we had 0%. And this is actually not a bad thing. This is at Two Lights State Park, where we usually make a bulk of our collections. It shows that, again, this parasitoid fly is having a really great field day out there, and is really giving us good control of winter moth. There was also not a whole lot of defoliation or damage from this site, and it's been decreasing each year, which is good news and bad news. So that's the reason why this is 0% here, is because we weren't able to collect a lot of caterpillars because the flies are actually doing their job. And also this harpswell site. So 2 years ago, we've been trying to get these flies established in harpswell, but we had never been able to recapture them. And 2 years ago was our first recapture. I think we only got back 2 flies. But this year we're seeing an increase in the percentage of parasitism, which is great news, meaning the numbers are building and will hopefully give some effective control for winter moth. But that's all I have for browntail and winter moth, but I will take any questions that you guys might have.
All right, thanks, Tom. Yeah, I don't see that anything came into the chat box. So we'll save certainly browntail for the end, in the anticipation there might be some stuff with that. But if anybody had any quick winter moth stuff before we move on, but otherwise I say we get through the rest of the content. So we'll go to Miss Colleen Tierling, and she will talk to us about a variety of things. So take it away, Colleen.
So I'll be talking about several different things, several different insects and diseases. First one I want to mention is beech leaf disease, which is a relatively new disease for us in Maine, but it's been getting a lot of press, so hopefully people have heard about it. I want to give just a brief update about it. We found it last spring in Maine, in Lincolnville, and as of this month, we have found it so far in 6 counties in Maine: Knox, Hancock, Lincoln, Penobscot, Waldo, and York. And Hancock and York were both new counties for 2022. This is a disease that will kill not only our own beech trees, but it can also kill some of our more exotic species. So it kills the European beech and will also affect the Asian species. Go ahead. It started in, as you can see here in the pale blue, it started in Ohio and has been spreading largely eastward. And as you can see in the light purple and bright pink colors, those are the where we found it in the last couple of years. So it's been kind of spreading like wildfire. And it's starting to be more of a concern than it has been in some of the early years when it was more localized. Go ahead, Mike. This is where it is in Maine. The bulk of it is in the sort of the central coast area, and also moving inland. But we did find it one small spot down in York County, and we suspect we will probably find more. And so this is one of those things, if you see it, we would really like people to let us know, because we're trying to figure out where exactly it is. in the state. Go ahead. So what do we know about beech leaf disease? A lot less than we would like to know. We're not even 100% sure what causes it. We do know that a nematode, this tiny microscopic roundworm, is associated consistently with the disease. It's probably involved in causing the disease, but it's probably not the entire story. There's probably more than just this little nematode. There may be associated fungi. There could well be environmental issues and factors that are part of it, whether it's being close to water. There is research going on, and we're trying to figure out more of, just trying to understand more about this disease, because we still have a ton of questions. There's not any real treatment for it yet, and so there is research going on about that. We don't even really know how it gets spread around. It's a nematode that is inside the buds and the leaves, in the tissue of the trees. How does it move around? Obviously, it spreads because you saw that map. Does this move around with birds? Are there other ways? And so we just need to do a lot more research. Go ahead, Mike. What is Maine doing? Is we're participating in studies throughout the region, to try to just learn a little bit about beech leaf disease and how it progresses. We have 8 long-term monitoring plots that were set up in 2021, and then there was one more that was added this year. And we go out and survey those plots to see how the disease is progressing. And because we're certainly seeing a progression of the disease in New England that is atypical of what had been seen in previous years, further to the west of us. We tend to find that the disease is attacking, going sort of, instead of starting down in the understory and then slowly moving up into the mature trees, we're finding that the mature trees are affected right quickly. And we need to try to figure out what exactly is going on. So Maine is part of sorry, Maine is part of a larger region-wide research. Go ahead. That's Mike. So there are, oh, maybe go back. Thanks. So some of the symptoms of the disease are, the obvious one is the banding of the leaves, which can be really easily seen even in the winter, but the leaves also will get distorted and leathery. And as I said, it usually starts in the understory of the beech, and then moves up into the mature trees, but we're not necessarily seeing that in Maine. And things have been advancing really quickly. Go ahead. Can you go ahead, Mike? Thanks. And this is the
Colleen, I think it's lagging on your end a little bit.
Oh, okay. So if you're seeing the green leaves with the banding, that is what is the easiest way to find beech leaf disease. If you walk into a beech forest and look up into the canopy, up in towards the sun, you can see the bands of darker color. And this is really probably the easiest thing to notice. And you can see that even in the winter. If you see, so I'm at the the slide where you can see a winter leaf. The leaves remain on the trees, and even once the leaves turn brown, you can see those bands in between the veins of the leaf. And even leaves that are fallen on the ground, you can pick them up and see them. Then this is most obvious in our native beaches. If you look at some of the more exotic beaches, the banding is a little bit harder to see, but you still can see some of that banding. Go ahead, Mike. This is also some of the leathery looking leaves. As the disease advances a little bit further, the leaves get thicker, leathery, and get distorted. This is also something that's worth looking at and that you may see. Go ahead. And just for a comparison, this is a healthy beech leaf. They're not perfect, but you can see that they are a thinner kind of papery leaf without obvious banding between the veins. Go ahead. A couple of lookalikes are Araneum galls made by a tiny little mite. And you can see sort of, if you flip, although it looks like there is banding between the leaves, if you flip it over, you can see sort of little pits that were made by the mites. And you will often see that kind of bright pink fuzz caused by the mites. And so that is not beech leaf disease. Also, the woolly beech leaf aphid can cause distortion and what looks sort of like banding between the veins. But again, if you look, you can see the white woolly aphids themselves. So those are things you will not see with beech leaf disease. Go ahead. So as I mentioned earlier, there are way more questions than we have answers at this point in time. How does it spread? Is it wind? It's probably not wind. Is it birds? Is it other things? How does it get around? And also then for practical reasons, what kind of sanitation should we have after we visit an infested site? How can we avoid moving it ourselves? What organisms above and beyond the nematode are involved? How and why do the symptoms develop, and the rate of development and the advance of the disease? Why are we seeing these advanced symptoms so quickly in New England? And then what is the interaction between beech bark disease, which is very prevalent in our area, and beech leaf disease? So we'll hopefully in coming years have more answers. But for now, we would just like sort of people to keep an eye out on their beech leaves and their beech trees, and let us know if you see any symptoms. Go ahead. So the next insect I want to talk about is red pine scale. This is an insect that's been around for a number of years in Maine, but it's probably been kind of under the radar. Hasn't moved really, it's not really widespread in Maine yet. And we probably haven't talked about it a lot because we've been focusing on a lot of other invasive insects. But things have been progressing a little bit in the last couple of years with red pine scale, so we thought we would mention it. It is a scale insect similar to elongate hemlock scale. You're probably not going to see it really obviously. You sometimes will see this kind of white fuzz on the trees. Go ahead, Mike. You can also see tiny insects on the scales, under the needle scales. The adult males are winged. You'll probably not see them. And even the females, which are attached to the tree along the scales, as you can see here, it's not something you're going to see obviously. Because they're just, it's not really obvious. What you may see, go ahead, Mike, is trees, red pine trees that start to turn red and start to die. And if it happens quickly, let us know. This is an insect that in the first few years before we found it in Maine, we were, on the Mount Desert area, red pine trees were turning red and were dying, and we assumed that it might be, needle cast diseases or other things. And then as we started to look more closely, you take some of those branches and look at them underneath the microscope, and you can see these little scale insects. So if, just watch for red pine declining quickly, dying. And if you see widespread decline of your red pine, let us know, and we can come take a look and take some samples and see if it is indeed the red pine scale. This is an insect. Okay, go ahead, Mike. This is an insect that has been slowly spreading. We found it first in 2014 in Mount Desert Island. It had been there for a few years, I think, before we, or a number of years before we determined that the trees were not dying from a needle cast disease or other issues. They were dying from the red pine scale. We subsequently found it on the mainland in Lemoyne. Then in 2019, we found it down at Kittery, which was not entirely surprising because it has been found in New Hampshire as well. 2020, we found it in Berwick, adjacent to Kittery, but we also found it in several other towns in Hancock County. And then last year we found it in Steuben, which was the first find in Washington County. These finds in 2020 and 21 do suggest to us that, like a lot of other scale insects, this insect may be spread through wind and birds. And go ahead, Mike. So this insect is a lot like elongate hemlock scale or even hemlock woolly adelgid. It is spread by crawlers from the late winter into the late summer. And other times it's not really terribly mobile. As I said, the females are stuck to the branches and the twigs, and only the males have wings. And so when it does spread, tends to be more through wind and probably birds or people moving it around, like people can move around hemlock woolly adelgid or elongate hemlock scale. So again, watch for decline and dying red pine. Let us know, give us a call or email us at foresthealth@maine.gov. There's not much in the way of treatment. And for infested, you can treat single trees, but for forest stands, basically the plan is, or the treatment is to just plan to harvest infested stands, because there's not that much that can be done for them. And go ahead. The last insect I want to talk about is hemlock woolly adelgid. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with this because we've talked about it a lot, but it's very obvious as at this time of year, those little discrete woolly masses on the undersides of the twigs at the bases of the needles are becoming very obvious as they start to put on their winter wool. Go ahead, Mike. And you guys have probably seen this set of slides quite a bit, but the crawlers are present. Eggs and crawlers are present from the end of February, beginning of March to the end of July. They're very abundant, and the highest risk of spread are from the crawlers. They're really tiny. Go ahead, Mike. You can see here we put a beat sheet underneath of an infested hemlock branch, and we tap the branch. Doesn't look like there's anything there, but go ahead, Mike. When you look closely, you can see really, really tiny crawlers. They are almost invisible unless you have young, good eyes or a hand lens. And so if you brush up against a hemlock tree, if you're working around hemlock trees, if you have machinery or equipment, you will pick up these crawlers. You're almost guaranteed to pick up the crawlers on your vehicles, equipment, on your clothing, your hat, if you are brushing up against hemlock trees that are infested. And you will not see them on your vehicle, on your clothing, because they are so tiny. Go ahead. I have this picture. This is from Fry Island, and I just wanted to show the impact of crawlers being moved around by vehicles, and the importance of pruning back hemlock trees so that they do not come in contact with things that are infested. If you look at the dark trees to the left of, or to the right of the picture, you see the dark, healthy hemlock trees, and then over to the left of that roadway, you can see some other dark, healthy hemlock trees. And right to the immediate left of that roadway, there's a bare, almost dead tree. That is a hemlock tree. All the dark, healthy hemlock trees, we could not find hemlock woolly adelgid on those trees, but that one tree that was leaning and extending over that laneway and was brushed up against by every vehicle that came through, that tree was practically dead. And pretty much, I think the year after that, or the year that I took that picture, that tree was cut down because it was dead. That just sort of underscores the importance of reducing human-mediated spread of hemlock woolly adelgid. Go to the next slide. So these pictures show some other high-risk situations. You can see hemlock trees adjacent to parking lots. There's an infested hemlock tree near an oil tank where a delivery vehicle would have come in. Hemlock trees overhanging roadways, driveways, even hemlock trees over in parks, overhanging trails. One of the first things that almost every park does when they find park or land trust does when they find hemlock woolly adelgid in their on their land is to cut down or to trim back the overhanging hemlock branches so that people do not brush up against the trails, and to trim it back from their parking areas. And it's so much, and that's sort of it's a really good thing to do, and it will slow down the spread of and reduce the chance of spread by humans in the park or along the trails. But it's a little bit sort of closing the barn door after the horse has already left. And so if you can, if you do not have hemlock woolly adelgid in your town, pruning back some of these high risk hemlock trees so that cars along roadways and driveways and parking lots do not touch up against potentially infested vehicles, and along your trails so that people don't brush up against hemlock branches. You may reduce the chance, or you should reduce the chance and slow down the spread of hemlock woolly adelgid, because we do know that people move hemlock woolly adelgid around. You can't do anything about the adelgid that get blown around, with all those crawlers that get blown around on the wind. You can't stop the wind. You can't do much to stop the birds and other animals, but you can prune back some of your trees so that you can reduce the hemlock or the hemlock woolly adelgid spread by humans. Now is a great time to prune because the crawlers are not present, and eggs and crawlers are not present, and the only adelgid on the hemlock trees right now are firmly attached to the branch. And when you prune those branches off, those adelgids will die. Next slide. It's also, I should mention that it is safe at this time of year. If you're pruning off material, it's safe to move them to your transfer station. Because you won't be spreading hemlock woolly adelgid. There is a quarantine for hemlock woolly adelgid. And so be aware of that. Next slide. This is my last slide, and it is a little bit distressing because it shows where hemlock woolly adelgid was as of last year, as of the end of last year. This year, we've filled in that map a lot. There's a lot of towns, especially down around the Rockland and Camden area where we've had a ton of reports. It's becoming much more prevalent in that area, even up on Mount Desert Island, where we found it in the forest a couple of years ago. And we are now finding it in multiple places on MDI, including in the park, in the national park, as well as places in town. So it's well established in multiple areas. It's still very early on in that area, but it is established there. But we have found it in 10 new towns in 2022, and I had to actually this morning adjust this map because we found it in multiple spaces. We found it in Pownell in the state park there, Bradbury Mountain State Park. We found it in Wyndham, Sebago, Naples, and Casco. So all of those towns surrounding the Sebago Lake. It had been on Freiburg on the island in Sebago Lake for many, many years until we found it in 2016, I think. But it had been there a long time before that. And now we have found it pretty much around the shores of that lake. Thanks to Wayne and Abby, our technicians, who've done an amazing job this year of surveying for this insect. We've also found it in Dresden and Whitefield. And we have found it for the first time. We found it in Kennebec County in Litchfield. And then we just confirmed that we found it in Gardner, which is outside the quarantine zone. So it is definitely spreading. It has been spreading. In the past, we've seen it spreading, largely more along sort of coastal areas, moving down the coast. But now we're starting to see it more and more inland. So this is an insect, if you see it in places where you haven't before, let us know. And I think that is pretty much it for my talk.
All right, thank you, Colleen. And just because I have control of the PowerPoint while it's handy, I just want to go back to this quarantine slide because Colleen, your audio cut out. But anyways, just so folks are clear, as Colleen mentioned, it's a quote unquote safe time of year to do pruning and move stuff. But, if you're in one of these regulated towns shaded in blue, no matter the time of year, just because the crawlers aren't active, you cannot, cross this boundary. So, even if you use a transfer station or whatever, that's, in a non-regulated area, you can't freely move across that boundary. So we really want to keep that stuff in bounds there. So great. All right, so I'll stop sharing then, and then, we will certainly open it up to questions. So if you have questions, get them into the chat box, please.
Mike, I'd like to just share my screen real briefly, because one of the things I wanted to make sure we highlight is that as far as the red pine scale, the 2022 detections that we had, we did have a number of detections, both roadside and through aerial survey in more interior Hancock County than we'd seen them in the past. And so the line running on the top of the map there is the airline, Route 9. Let's see, Cherry Fields down here, Beddington up here. You can see that we found it really pretty close to Route 9. Just south of it, there's a ton of red pine throughout this area that's been planted. And just really want to stress for folks that if you're managing red pine for commercial harvest, probably anywhere south of the latitude of Millinocket, you really ought to make sure that you're keeping close tabs on it, because the mortality can accumulate really pretty rapidly with this insect. We've had folks, a couple of folks reach out this past summer and fall who had been into the stands earlier in the year and they were green, and then going back later in the year and the crowns were all red. So just a heads up on that.
Great, thanks, Allison. So, All right, quiet group out there. Does anybody have any questions that they would rather ask over the microphone versus putting in the chat box? I don't see anything in the chat box. All right, we have a hand up. Let's see. Jay, if you want to go ahead and open up your mic, go ahead and ask a question.
Well, I was just wondering, I don't seem to have a chat box, so
Oh.
unfortunately, I can't put my full name in, and I'm not sure why I don't have a chat box. I can't seem to find it, but I just had a question about the red pine scale, and do you think that the occurrence of that seems to be environmentally linked? Is there any changes or anything that have driven the increased population and the increased mortality in the red pine?
Interesting question.
Oh.
I guess I'll try, or Colleen, did you want to answer that?
Well, you're welcome to answer it as well. I would say part of it is time and populations building up. With a lot of these insects, like scales and adelgids, it takes a while for the population to build up, and then we start to see things spreading more.
Okay.
Oops, I
All
don't know if didn't hear Mike go out, but I'll just add, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's an environmental link there, Jay. You know, it's not as neat as some of the other associations, but you know, it's kind of, you know, another classic, you know, Maine coastal problem that's kind of spreading, you know, down east along the coast. So obviously we're going through a lot of climatic changes and changes in precip and stuff. So some of these, you know, hemlock woolly adelgid's probably the best, you know, example, you know, of an insect, you know, these small scale insects or adelgids that are somewhat actually, you know, cold susceptible, whereas a lot of insects aren't. So, you know, I won't say that it does have something to do with it, but, you know, not a lot has been looked at yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if that, you know, moderating, you know, temperature and, you know, some easy winters hasn't had anything to do with some of these recent developments.
I agree. And then there's also drought issues for a lot of insects, a lot of these sucking insects like elongate hemlock scale and hemlock woolly adelgid. When a tree is stressed by drought, it's going to succumb faster to an insect. So that may also play into why we're starting to see things spread.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. And since you don't have a chat box, I'll just ask, are you in need of any credits so we could get your last name, or you all set?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I don't know if there's a way for me to email my information to somebody or.
Okay, yeah, you can just reach out to foresthealth@maine.gov when we're done. So sorry about that. So, so yeah, there has been a lot of good information put into the chat box. So thanks for adding some of that stuff, Allison. But basically everything, you know, we've talked about, there's, you know, the information we covered today and a lot more online. So please take a look at some of those links. Reminder from Amy. Okay, so yeah, Amy is notified everybody again, if you're looking for credits, to please share all your information with her at foresthealth@maine.gov. Do we have anybody else that would like to ask a question over the microphone? All right. Go back here. Jordan Kimball, go ahead.
Yes, excellent webinar today. Here's the question. We see one strategy to deal with some of these outbreaks is to harvest the trees and try to remove the problem, salvage some of the remaining resource. What are the recommendations these days with emerald ash borer? I missed the start of the webinar. Are we seeing impacts in Maine from emerald ash borer? Are people, what is the trend? I'm sure there's variation, but what is the trend in terms of removing ash? People trying to, you know, we're hanging on. We don't see any impacts, but I know nearby where ash are getting hammered. What's the trend these days? Are people removing ash in Maine, trying to get ahead of this, or are people holding safe? And I don't have a chat box either, so just Just a heads up. Thank
I'm
you.
not sure what's going on with the chat box situation, unfortunately. Yeah, Jordan, I guess it depends on the situation. So I'll kind of approach it from, a forestry standpoint and a municipality standpoint if you're calling in from a municipality. But very early on in the emerald ash borer, frights, when we were learning a lot of things, there was a lot of recommendations to, salvage your stuff ahead of time, pre-salvage. What we're really recommending now in forestry settings, at least, and oh yeah, to answer your other question, yeah, certainly we're finally at the stage where we do have mortality from emerald ash borer in southern Maine. So we are getting there, and the pattern of damage is pretty exponential here. So within the next few years here, we're going to see a lot of mortality and continual decline in southern Maine. So again, not sure where you're calling from, but what we're really preaching now is to really pay attention to where emerald ash borer is. And, once it gets close to you, we always want people to have a plan. So, if you own 40 acres, keep track of what ash is on it, and have a, kind of a harvest plan in place ahead of time, have some contacts that can do the work if you're looking at something like that. But, we kind of want people to wait till the very last minute, because you can get some additional growth on that stuff while you're waiting for a harvest. But you just have to be ready to act. So yeah, we don't really want people to go out and liquidate ash before emerald ash borer is, anywhere nearby. That's really not helpful, from a good forestry standpoint. And, there is things we're looking at, they're looking at in the upper Midwest where emerald ash borer has been for a longer amount of time. So, there may be some, shred of genetic resistance on the landscape, that we could observe if we allow emerald ash borer to overcome some certain stands. So if everything's missing, we won't get any of that information. So yeah, kind of like a wait and see, and just be ready to act. And yeah, you may well have to do some removals. And especially for municipalities, knowing it's coming, yeah, having that management plan. I think Jan just put something in the chat about that template for an urban management plan. Just be prepared for that stuff. And when it gets close, then it's the time to act.
Yeah, actually, Mike, the link I put in the chat is the 10 recommendations to help you manage ash in your woods in the face of emerald ash borer and climate change. It's a resource from the Forest Stewards Guild. That's one I really like for recommendations for managing more at the landscape level for at a rural forest resource. And there's certainly lots of links on our website too to example management plans for municipal ash management as well. And if anyone has any questions regarding municipal ash management, feel free to reach out to myself or to Amy, and she can connect you.
Great, thanks, Jan. Yeah, that goes for all of us. If anybody has questions after this is all said and done, we are always available, so please reach out. So any other questions out there? Seeing that we obviously have a chat box issue, go ahead, raise your hand, and we'll get you on mic.
Hey, Mike, I just wanted to kind of open it up if there's anybody on the call who's responding to ash damage, if they wanted to share any of their experience.
That'd be great as well. All right, there's a hand somewhere. Let's see. First up, we have Sue Hatch, and then we'll go to Emily Francis after Sue. Sue, if you want to open up your mic.
Sorry.
Oops, there we go.
Nobody's mentioned the treatment that they have been using in Ohio or trying for the beech leaf disease, putting a polyphosphide, I may have the name wrong right now, around the trunks of the trees as a fertilizer to improve their viability. Can anyone tell me anything about that? I've tried it on two of my many beech trees. And of course, it's just, there's no way to tell yet if anything's happened. So can anybody give me anything?
Yeah, we're basically, at the same level of information. This is rapidly unfolding. So we're aware of that. We have put out some information on those treatments, again, it's nothing that's been ground tested here in Maine, because of the time frame, but that information should be available online. I can't personally add much more than that. I don't know if anybody else has any more experience or a more in-depth answer they'd like to share. But otherwise, I can direct you to our online resource. I think it's in a fact sheet that's come out.
Okay, thank you. If anybody else knows anything, let me know.
Okay.
I know there's some arborists that are testing it also.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could just chime in here. I went on a forest health workshop over in Ohio, and I got to see some of these first trees that they had treated in the understory as part of the initial experiment. And there was the thing was that there were very young understory trees, but there was a really marked difference between the ones that were treated and the ones that were not. And we were told that initially all of the trees had looked like the untreated trees. They were all really ragged. But I don't know if that's a real long-term solution. I believe that it was initially suggested or done because at that time we didn't know anything about beech leaf disease. We didn't even know about the nematode, but the symptoms sort of were reminiscent of a separate disease or another disease. So they decided that they would try these phosphate or phosphite treatments, and they did have good results. But other than that, there hasn't really been a whole lot done with those.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tom. Next question, I see Emily Francis's hand is raised, so maybe it's a question, or maybe Emily will tell us about some of the work going on with her group.
Hi, thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for the excellent information that's been shared today. I am with the University of Maine, the team that's working on ash and EAB research at the University of Maine, Orono, in the School of Forest Resources. And the question that was posed a couple minutes ago regarding what to do with ash trees, I just wanted to give a little bit of an update. My partner, Tyler, had been on the call for a minute and at the beginning, but I think he had to leave. So I just wanted to give a little bit of an update. We have a really solid draft of an ash seed collection manual that is being written for the citizen scientists, land trusts, private landowners. It's not directed directly for researchers. That is we're hoping to get that out by late winter, early spring to the public, so that people who have ash on their landscape and are really interested in helping for the collection of genetic material and for future research and for plantings of ash, it's really important that the ash stays on the landscape for as long as we can have it there. Ash doesn't produce seed every year, so it's important that we can keep it as long as possible to get as much genetic material out before we have trees that succumb to EAB across the state. So we're also working on a website, developing information from our research group and our partners to get information to the public. So when we have more information on that, we'll make sure to circulate that, and we'll be able to answer more questions to a wider audience regarding things like keeping ash on the landscape. And so that's one of our big things. It looks like Tyler is on the call. So great. I will pass it over to Tyler and let him add some more information. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Emily. Tyler Everett here. I'm a PhD student in John Daigle's lab too at the University of Maine. I just wanted to highlight an upcoming webinar that our lab group will kind of be a part of. It's through the Science and Practice Addressing Forest Climate Change in Maine webinar series. It's a cool webinar series that couples a webinar with a field tour. And so our research project, protecting the ash of the northern forest, we'll have a webinar in that series this time around. So March 1st and March 3rd. March 1st being the webinar from noon to 1, and then an all-day field tour on March 3rd will be a part of that webinar series. It'll really focus in on the management that we're testing to increase the resilience of some of these ash forests to emerald ash borer ahead of its arrival. And we're hoping to kind of share our strategies being tested in our experiment to maybe see if there's interest in trying to apply similar tactics across the state to respond to emerald ash borer. Sorry, I got disconnected, so I didn't get to chime in if you were looking for me, Emily, my bad. But that's all I had to share. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Tyler. No, Emily gave us a nice update of things going on, and yeah, that highlights. I mean, Jordan, my answer, to your question before was oversimplified. Obviously, there's a lot of multifaceted approaches going on. In addition to that stuff, somebody did ask a question about some pesticide options. Jan put some information in the chat about that. So it's not just obviously a cut or don't cut, and biocontrol, not readily available to the average homeowner or forest owner, but we're getting that on the landscape as much as we can for ash preservation and the future forest and things like that. So yeah, we're trying every tool in the toolbox, but there's no one silver bullet, so it's a little of this and a little of that. So, okay, who else has a question out there?
I have a question to the participants. This is Jan. So people were having trouble with the chat. I see that Amy must have, or somebody fixed that and turned the chat on. I'm wondering if the participants can see any of the links or the information that was posted prior to that being turned on, or if we need to re-link that in the chat.
I think the chat was turned on in the beginning, Jan.
Yeah. Okay.
Michael says he can see all the links. Okay.
Okay, very good. And Jay, you put your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I think it could be that I didn't download the app. I'm doing Microsoft Teams through my browser, so that could be the reason why there's no chat box.
Okay.
And so I still don't have one, and I'm guessing I probably won't just because of the fact that I'm participating through my browser.
Gotcha. Thank you for that.
All right, that's good to know. Yeah, anybody that does have difficulties and was never able to access that chat box, do just reach out to foresthealth@maine.gov, and we'll get those links over separately in an email or something like that. And certainly those folks looking for the quiz and to get their credits. So
yeah, and again, that email, it's one word, foresthealth@maine.gov, no punctuation, foresthealth@maine.gov.
all right, well, we have hit noon, so I'll give one final option for anybody that wants to ask a question. Going once, going twice, going three times. That'll do it. So I'll close the meeting. Yeah, I guess thanks everybody for attending very much. As I pointed out, lots of this information is available online. We're always accessible. Please feel free to reach out to us. As far as future meetings, again, we'll be meeting in the next year. I would tune into that. So yeah, depending on when that is, there'll probably be some regulatory updates. And going back to that pesticide theme, there might be some news on, certain pesticide availabilities that are changing that are used for forest health, pests and stuff like that. So, but anyways, we'll obviously advertise that broadly when we know the details. So that's all I have to say. So any other presenters have any last minute housekeeping things to close out the meeting? I'll give the opportunity. All right, hearing none, I guess that's it. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you in the new year. Bye-bye.